from America. I know the white tears and white fragility will be hard on this one again, but I'm still going to say it anyway. White people, my fellow snowflakes, I have some news for you guys. We are never indigenous anywhere in the world. We did not come from one particular country, and we are not native to one particular country, not anywhere in the world. And I know y'all be coming at me like, well, we are Europeans, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to say one single sentence. The deeper you dig, the blacker humanity gets globally. White people are a genetic mutation of the black woman. You can look that up. It is what it is. You're welcome.
So American Indian Defense League is a conglomeration of many indigenous people, American Indians from the north all the way to the Inuit, all the way down south, past the Mapuche in Chile, all the way down south. We are united as American Indians, as indigenous people, reclaiming and claiming what is ours against pseudo-history, both European pseudo-history and Afrocentric pseudo-history. We're talking about wabos, which was a term that was coined by an African-American who hates people who hate their heritage. It's called wannabe Aboriginal. And they came and taught us, quote unquote, how to be indigenous. The Olmec were black, all those type of misinformation. Choctaw people are original, black people, phenotypical black people. You're going to hear things like Verrazano and all these other early explorers saying there was Capaculla indigenous people here. That pseudo history of this wabo community. This is, it goes to silly, and it goes all the way to threatening indigenous women's lives and children's lives by saying things like, they're going to rape our women in front of their men, and they're going to come after us on reservations. Like, I think Chief Janice said that at one point, that she's going to come on the reservation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a wide spectrum, but what we are is that we are American Indians defending who we are and promoting real history and trying to debunk a lot of this mythology that's going on in social media, things like the wabo movement, Moorish American, house squatters, things like that. So welcome aboard. We are a group of non-racist indigenous.
DNA testing. Does the American Indian Defense League believe a DNA test or swab of saliva can trace a so-called African American all the way back to Africa without having the DNA or saliva from their family who stayed in Africa? Many of you remember the Maury Show. Who are the three people that needs to be present in order for the DNA test to be done? The mother, child, and father.
In the case of 18-month-old Hazel, Nick, you are not. And in the case of 18-month-old Hazel Matthew, you are not. When it comes to 3-year-old Kanaya, Michael, you are not. When it comes to 3-year-old Elijah, Michael, you are not. In the case of 1-year-old Logan, John, you are not. We are good! We are good! You ain't tomorrow morning!
So the question we should be asking is, when we provide our DNA samples so this DNA test can be done to find out who we are or what type of ethnicity we have in our DNA, who are these organizations comparing and matching our DNAs to? Are they taking thousands or millions of DNA samples from people living in Africa, then comparing our DNAs in America with theirs until they find some type of match or comparison? Don't we think it's important for us to know what they do with our DNA samples and what or who they compare it to? Also, are these organizations providing some type of authentic ledgers or documents stating whose DNA in Africa they are comparing and matching our DNAs with here in America? Slave votes. They can find enough dinosaur bones to fill up an entire museum, bones dating back thousands and thousands of years ago, but they can't find thousands upon thousands of slave boats used to transport millions of melanated people from Africa to America that were used less than 400 years ago? What forests did they use and cut down to manufacture the thousands of slave boats used to transport the melanated people from Africa to America? Some people believe the water destroyed all the slave boats. Does this mean after the colonizers finally arrived to America, they said, well, we don't need the boats anymore, just let them sink. Then the water destroyed millions or thousands of the slave boats over a certain period of time? Therefore, the millions or thousands of slave boats that were used cannot be found, and this is why they no longer exist. Many of the slave boats supposedly arrived in the same general area, thousands and thousands of boats, and they can't find them? That makes you wonder if they even truly exist. If some believe the water destroyed all the boats as time went on, why do they believe these slave boats with no engines could make it across the Atlantic? Non-Google authentic ledgers. If these ledgers still exist, the American Indian Defense League should be able to provide all authentic records, ledgers, and record books that has an authentic list of all the millions of so-called Black African Americans that were transported from Africa to America, right? SlaveVoyages.org claims they found a blueprint to one of the boats, but don't mention where this blueprint was found, what language it was written in, who wrote the blueprint, what condition the blueprint was in. Was the blueprint found by something? Was it found inside of something? They just found a blueprint to one of the slave boats, then tell the whole world this is what the slave boats look like. SlaveVoyages.org have the same belief and agenda as the foreign government. They are pushing and promoting the same exact Eurocentric pseudo-history agenda and belief the foreign government and their public education is promoting. The American Indian Defense League are a group of non-racist indigenous people. Why should you have to clarify you're non-racist if you know in your heart you and your channel has never promoted anything degrading or racist? So they are a group of non-racist indigenous people that are okay with modern-day American Indians, Native Americans, even some Caucasians being indigenous to America. Regardless of the Caucasian race committing mass genocide on the American Indian, Native Americans, and their children, they are still okay with some Caucasians claiming to be indigenous to America. But they have a huge problem when a melanated copper colored person claims their indigenous connection with America. Even if the so-called African American provides their genealogy that confirms they do not descend from Africa, which also confirms they are not African, regardless of this evidence, the American Indian Defense League still has a huge problem with this. They call them wabos, wannabe copper color aboriginals. Not only is that degrading, that's discrimination, that's being prejudiced, and that's promoting racism. So why does the host of the American Indian Defense League refuse to show his face? Is he hiding behind his avatar? Why does he call copper color indigenous people already being here in America misinformation? Is it because he doesn't have copper color brown skin? I'm just curious, respectfully asking mature adult questions. Is it because he can't put his skin next to a penny and see the similarities? Maybe it's the information public education does not teach that date back to the 1800s that state copper colored people were found here in America by Europeans and not the Native American or American Indians. Maybe it's because he's afraid of people taking his picture and writing disrespectful, degrading remarks on it, then promoting it in a prejudiced manner all over social media. Someone doing the same exact thing he has done and continues to do to other people. Is this why he doesn't want to show his face? Here's a picture of me comparing my skin color to the soil next to an ancient cliff dwelling. Is it because he can't show the world his skin complexion is just about the same exact color as America's ancient soil? Are these some of his insecurities? Is this the petty, low self-esteem the host of the American Indian Defense League is dealing with? Did some type of Eurocentric pseudo-history indoctrination cause the host of this channel to feel this way? Is this why he calls copper color aboriginals or copper color indigenous people already being here in America misinformation? Are these some of the reasons why he remains behind his avatar? Just because one melanated individual makes a comment about murder, rape, or coming after you on the reservation does not mean the whole entire race of melanated people have the same intentions. Because one or a group of melanated people out of millions make a silly remark, you promote that all the melanated people claiming their authentic identity, heritage, and culture are wabos and are threatening to murder, rape, and come after you people on the reservation just because of some silly remarks?
African Americans who predominantly come from West Africa, West Central Africa, that have nothing to do with East African history or culture. This is just generally, right? You're from West Central Africa 400 years ago. So we'll take that. Why don't they embrace West Central Africa when it comes to African Americans?
They believe and promote everything we were taught in public education, which is Eurocentric pseudo-history. They promote the transatlantic slave theory, the African diaspora, out of Africa theory, so-called blacks can only descend from West Central Africa, so-called blacks only have 400 years of history as slaves. The American Indian Defense League promotes exactly what public education teaches. They claim their channel promotes real history, but it's really quite similar to Eurocentric pseudo-history, if not the same. They promote the Caucasian European colonizers as the race responsible for the arrival of the so-called black African American. They claim the Caucasian Europeans transported millions of copper-colored melanated people from Africa to America across the Atlantic. He promotes the modern-day American Indian, Native American as being the only race to arrive and inhabit the Americas first. The same race of people public education promotes, the same public education that refused to teach modern-day American Indians and Native Americans their true history and language in school. But the American Indian Defense League still promotes and believes everything public education teaches about copper-colored melanated people like it's true. Remember, the American Indian Defense League is reclaiming and claiming what is theirs against both European pseudo-history and Afrocentric pseudo-history. Then he says they are talking about wabos, which was a term that was coined by an African American, pay attention, who hates people who hate their heritage. He wasn't specific about what people this so-called African American was referring to when he coined the term wabo. Anybody could be a so-called wabo. He could have been talking about the modern-day American Indian, Native American, or the Caucasian people. The American Indian Defense League could be manipulating the term wabo and promoting the term in a racist, degrading manner, as if the man responsible for the term wabo was talking about his own copper-colored people. Who knows until we see the evidence of this term wabo? The actions of the American Indian Defense League are pretty much saying they hate us brown copper-colored people for wanting to claim our authentic identity, heritage, and culture instead of claiming the Eurocentric pseudo-history public education tries to force on us and our children, so they call us wabos. Two black Mexican Indian generals and their huge black armies won Mexico's independence. One of the generals is on Mexico's currency. They eliminated racial categories from birth, marriage, and death certificates. Today, there are states and towns all over Mexico named after these two black Mexican Indian generals. The black Mexican Indian, Vincent Guerrero, was the president when Mexico gained its independence, not a modern-day American Indian or Native American. Where were they when all the copper-colored so-called black people were fighting for Mexico's independence? Vincent Guerrero was mixed, but if you knew the real legacy, he fought and died for the so-called black people. The king of Hawaii, King Kamehameha I, was a so-called black man, not a modern-day American Indian or Native American. This American Indian, Native American is going to tell you they did not build the mounds.
Because my recent ancestors, used scaffold and bundle burials. We didn't build mounds.
The host decides to ask an archaeologist who's responsible for building these mounds. Not once did the archaeologist reply, American Indian or Native American are the first in America. They are responsible for building these mounds.
Who is responsible for building those mounds?
I think we kind of see this all across the Americas, where you've got, for some reason, you've got, agricultural crops start to show up and people coalesce into villages and then larger cities and then eventually these giant large city-states. Cahokia is one of them. Chaco Canyon in the Pueblo world is another one. Andean societies, of course, Mesoamerica. And then for some reason, a good 500, 600, 800 years, there seems to be just some kind of dismantling